Well, Nebraska Big Ten Media Days is over, and I've been following it so closely that I even forgot to put my background up on the screen. So here we go. It's been one of those days, but as you can see, I'm here with Wilson Dittman to recap everything. And I appreciate you joining us, Wilson. Again, how you doing, man?
Man, busy day, Big Ten Media Days, a lot of recruiting stuff we're going to talk about as well. So just an average day to be a Nebraska fan in the off season. Things are getting fun.
100%. And I am, it's hard to. I mean, this is probably the best I think I've felt out of a Big Ten media day in a while, just about the overall tone and just how how Matt Rhule speaks about this team and just how he speaks about his philosophies in general. And it just kind of echoes a lot of what we've been saying this entire time. So, but we'll get into a little bit of that stuff. But first thing, we're going to open with the David Sanders Jr. update. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen the update. If you haven't, basically what it is kind of what we were talking about before with, as you know, the longer Nebraska stays in this race and the longer, the fact that he was willing to take more visits, Nebraska now stands a legitimate shot at being able to land him. Again, I mentioned before they got into the relationship late because he was with Riola over at Georgia. They were being recruited to Georgia together. And then after Riola came over to Nebraska, that's when, Nebraska then offered David Sanders and kind of started building that connection. So other schools have had him to campus, like 3 times. Nebraska's had him to campus, I think, once. And so trying to get him to campus again, but with a few weeks to go, they said they see us as a real contender. So what are your thoughts on that, man?
Well, I've got a quick update around David Sanders that I found out just a couple minutes before we hopped on here that the staff is trying to get him on campus this weekend. Of course, we've seen a bunch of guys in the 2025 and 2026 class that are visiting. So they're doing everything they can. There's a little bit of a scheduling conflict, but expect David Sanders to be on campus this weekend. They're doing a barbecue in Lincoln with the whole staff. And again, plenty of 26 and 27 recruits. So that's a development I just found out before hopping on here. But again, Nebraska is a real player in this recruiting process. There's a saying that goes around in recruiting. The last visit is the best visit, in Nebraska might just be his last visit before he ends up committing to a school, so they can pull all the strings to try to get him. I'm sure they're going to discuss NIL and playing time and everything else that you might be worried about. So David Sanders, again, he's very interested in Nebraska, but it should be noted he will be coming on campus very soon. It looks like it's almost a done deal around him that, again, he'll be visiting. Not that he's necessarily committing, but this is a very positive development.
And I think part of, him mentioning that he still wants to take visits, I felt like that boded well for Nebraska because I felt like Nebraska was probably a big part of that reason. Just because, again, he has visited the other schools so frequently. The one school that he probably wants to get another shot, to come out and see is Nebraska. And so that means that, even with the NIL stuff, which we'll get to in a little bit too, and with them being in the process early and already building that relationship, that Nebraska has snuck in and been able to build a close enough relationship to where he is taking a second, third look at Nebraska. So like we said before, it's not one of those things where, he put Nebraska in his top 4 teams for any other reason besides the fact that he's genuinely interested in Nebraska. And it's interesting that we mentioned visitors this weekend because also visiting this weekend, Isiah Mozee. So we've talked about him and our Jamar Mozee videos as, a potential, recruiting target now that Jamar has come over to Nebraska, and Isiah now visiting this weekend. So what's your thoughts on that, Wilson?
Yeah, another good development for the Huskers. Isiah Mozee, when talking to Oregon Ducks fans, they've been thinking he's on the way out for a couple of weeks now. And, from all intents and purposes, Isiah Mozee, he loves Oregon. He committed to them back in April. He's been on multiple visits to Eugene. But, over the last couple of weeks, Nebraska's been a real player getting back in that recruiting process. And one thing that I heard about Jamar Mozee, the reason why he went to Nebraska over Central Florida is just because of how much he believes in Dylan Rhule, that Dylan Rhule is a generational quarterback. And he's telling his son, hey, Isiah Mozee, you want to go and be with a quarterback, pair up with him. He can take you places. So that's something to watch out for in that recruiting process. We know that Oregon's recruiting class, honestly, not doing as good as it was back in June. A lot of decommits as of recent. Yeah. Some NIL concerns there. Of course, they have plenty of money, but the transparency is more of the issue there with the Ducks. And I know Isiah Mozee has definitely dealt with that, specifically that money margin where some other guys who he thinks he's better than, they're getting more money than he potentially will be. So we're not going to really get into all that, but very interested in Nebraska. And the fact that we hired his dad. Of course, he has that very tight knit connection with Jamar Mozee. Of course, that was his high school coach the last 3 years. Now, I'm sure that Jamar, his dad, is not trying to force him to come to Nebraska, but that does not hurt you. It's only going to help you. So it looks like he's getting very close to flip. I mean, I put this over 50% at this point in time.
Correct. And another interesting factor of this, when Rhule was talking today, he also mentioned that Jamar is going to be working with the offensive skill players, which means he would directly be working one-on-one with Isiah, when he gets to campus. So that's another thing to monitor there. Just keep an eye on that. But, again, like you said, I've talked to a couple Oregon guys, and it's kind of the same theme throughout, right? It's just one of those things where it's just like they weren't super confident in it. And I think a lot of them saw the writing on the wall when Jamar did come to Nebraska. So it's kind of expected, but it's still a little bit of a battle. But you got to think Nebraska's probably in the driver's seat in that regard, with Jamar now being able to coach and working with the offensive skill position players. And he probably wants to. His dad was his leader, his coach, and he built that relationship with him on and off the field. So you probably think that he wants to continue that and have just that comfortability. So. Those are the couple of big recruiting updates in regards to the visits. But let's go ahead and start trying to, dig into some of the, big storylines from the media days. So, first things first, let's go ahead and talk about the conversation around the quarterback room, because that's what people probably want to hear the most about. And, I thought it was interesting in some of his comments and what he talked about, with Rhule and his acumen and learning the game and his desire to learn the game, stating that, we see certain defenses in practice, but you get out there week 2, 3, and you start seeing these different defenses. And that's the thing that holds true freshman quarterbacks back. So it seems like he's alluding to the fact that Dylan's kind of ahead of the game in that regard. And he said it comes natural. So, what were your takeaways on that? And I'll touch on Jalen, what he said about Jalen Gramstead in a second. But yeah, what was your thoughts on his comments about the quarterback room?
Yeah, that Matt Rhule, I mean, he's a politician. So whenever anybody asks him about Dylan Rhule, he has to bring up Heinrich Haarberg. He has to bring up Daniel Kalen. But, he had a couple moments where he hinted at some stuff related to Dylan that's very positive. The high work ethic is just the thing that just kept coming back. I mean, the fact that, he's up in the morning throwing and at night he's working out, that he's earning respect. It's not being given to him. He's earning it from his teammates, and people really, once again, gravitate towards him, that he's just a natural born leader. So, and he's doing all the small things right. That's huge. Matt Rhule is not going to give away too much. I mean, he's not going to tell you that he's going to be, one of the best quarterbacks in college football right away. I mean, he might as well be, but Matt Rhule will not tell you that, obviously. And of course, he wants to give Heinrich Haarberg his best shot in the fall, and I think that's all fine. But I mean, the stuff that he hinted at related to Dylan Rhule, incredibly positive. He obviously feels like he's going to be a great quarterback and a great leader. So that was interesting. Again, he talked about Heinrich Haarberg, and whenever he'd bring him up, he said, once again, how much of a leader he was, that Heinrich's going to get a real opportunity in the fall. He won 5 games last year as a starter. So again, that's fine. And I don't know if it'll be a real competition battle, but sure, we can, sit there for, a little while and pretend that's the narrative. But it is interesting what he said about Dylan Rhule, and then I'll let you take it away with Jalen Gramstead, because he had some interesting bits about him as well.
For sure. Yeah. And another point there with Dylan, when he even, when Rhule's talking about him earlier this offseason, he made it a point to say, like, when you're a 5-star, you come in this, this building, you're a freshman, right? You got to earn your way. You got to earn your respect. And that's kind of Matt Rhule's thing. So the fact that he does come out and kind of, allude to these things and speak highly of them publicly, that's something that he has spoke about not doing before, unless they've really, really earned that. So that just goes to show how they feel about Dylan going forward and just his work ethic overall. And I think that'll lead to his success, of course, this season. Now talking about Gramstead, he had some high praise for Gramstead, but the overall takeaway was kind of what we were talking about before, where it's seeming that it's going to take, he's going to be there, but in a very limited capacity. He's not going to fight for the second spot on this depth chart, most likely, because he has so much to learn. But he said, he has that it factor. He's won a national championship. He carries himself as such, but it's not about who he is as, a person. It's more about what he knows. And so what were your takeaways on Gramstead? I'll give you, I'll take your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, so one thing that I really liked is that Matt Rhule compared it to the NFL, where you have a rookie quarterback, and a lot of times when you have that rookie, you bring in a veteran to teach him the ropes. This is how you do things. That was really the Jalen Gramstad move, not necessarily that he was going to be quarterback two, but he was going to be a veteran in that room. Says, "Hey, Dylan, this is how you're going to do things, how you're going to approach this at the next level." And of course, Jalen Gramstad, he doesn't know everything. Of course, only played NAIA, but again, he's still another veteran in that room, another voice. So it's interesting. I don't think he's going to be quarterback two. He's probably going to be quarterback three, given the fact that Daniel Kalen will redshirt. But yeah, I don't think he's going to be ready for the season. But that's not really what he is. He's a glorified coach at this point for Nebraska. That he's going to be, again, assisting that development. Who knows? Maybe he does have a future in coaching, and maybe that's part of the deal where when he's done this year, he's going to be a grad assistant for the Huskers. So yeah, I know some people might be bummed out that as of right now, it doesn't look like he's going to be quarterback two. But just the fact that he's going to be a glorified coach, that's just as good of news.
100%. Yeah, it's that locker room needs leadership. It needs veterans. It needs people who know how to win and have won. And Gramstad is that. And when I was doing research on him, I found a old thing from where he was at before, saying that he wanted to be a coach eventually. So it's one of those things that he aspires to be. And of course, Matt Rhule's really good at turning. He really takes these players that he thinks are going to be coaches, that he's done it his entire career, and made GAs, made players GAs, and then made them part of the staff. He even talked about it a lot today at Big Ten Media Days. So anything else on the quarterback room before we move on?
Not much. Nope.
All right, cool. Now I'm going to let you go ahead and take it away with the comments on the NIL, because this is something you have talked about before and kind of where Nebraska stands in the echelon of college football and with the big dogs when it comes to NIL. So he said it's to be honest, we're really good, but we're not near where we need to be. So what were your takeaways on his statements there?
Yeah, so this is something I've championed throughout the summer, specifically when we were going over the whole Dawson Merritt recruitment and the Michael Terry recruitment. I would say time and time again on my live streams, on my videos, that Nebraska's NIL is good. It's not good enough. It's not compared to Oregon, Texas A&M. They're beating us out continuously. And Matt Rhule said this, and I quote, "Make no mistake, we're not at the level of those guys. We have a long way to go. The truth has to be put out there. People may not like the truth, but you need to hear the truth. The truth is our NIL is doing great, but we have a long way to go." So again, Matt Rhule basically just, said the exact same thing I've been saying for the last 2 months, that our NIL is good enough to beat, teams like Iowa, Iowa State, Kansas State regularly. But when we're trying to beat out the big dogs, the LSUs, Ohio States, Oregons of the world, we're not going to win for those 4-5-star prospects. So yeah, that's something where Nebraska definitely needs to improve. We know that Troy Dan's been trying to improve that since he got here with the whole 1890 collective and basically tying that now to the university. But again, interesting stuff that basically confirmed all of our suspicions that it's good. It's not great. And that's the reason why we're not necessarily in the hunt for guys like Michael Terry anymore. And, we can get up there, but we just can't land them.
Yeah, it's just about closing the deal. And we've talked about this as one of the steps in the right direction, as winning is one of the steps in the right direction. Well, that's another part of this, because also what he was talking about is those teams aren't stagnant and staying where they're at. Those teams are continuing to try to keep other teams like Nebraska from catching them. So it's this constant, evolution of like trying to get ahead of the game, and you're still playing catch up this entire time. But at least it is something, I love that Matt Rhule is able to speak it, out there and let people know that this is an issue. That way, maybe it opens some eyes, for other people in the donors and other people to probably get a lot of this going in terms of the NIL budget. And like you said, Danon has done a great job so far with just trying to make the 1890 what they wanted it to be when it was first introduced. And of course, it had a very lackluster launch. We've talked about the naming convention being probably not the best in terms of that, but it is something that, that he says is getting better. So I think time will tell. And I think if he was being honest, so I think he would tell us if it wasn't improving. But you got to think, just with all the buzz around Nebraska, the donors and everybody are probably a little bit more willing to open their pocketbooks in regards to this. So that's another thing that winning will help too. Winning will help get more donors and get some money to help the NIL as well. So, good stuff there. So, I thought it was interesting too. We can talk about Carter Nelson. So, when mentioning Carter Nelson, and I actually talked about, I commented this on Generation Red podcast the other day when they were on Chancellor, but the tight end position is a very complex position. It's one of the most complex positions on the field, right? And he talked about that, and it's going to be easier to get Carter Nelson on the field as kind of a wide receiver. Wants him in the slot, to be able to kind of still play kind of a hybrid tight end role where he can still kind of play some of that role and I guess learn that aspect of the game. But he's such an athletic guy that, Matt Rhule even mentioned before, when he put up the Walter Payton, GIF with when we got Carter Nelson, he talked about, that's because we may line him up in the backfield. So he talked about, moving them all around. But it's the most accessible way for him to get onto the field and them to be able to utilize them because the tight end position is so complex to learn. And as me and you talked about before, late enrollee, really didn't have time to bulk up. He's going to have to put some size on to really play tight end, but also, he will be a good blocker out there on the edge. So a lot of good to come from him as a wide receiver. And we want to see his athletic prowess on display. We want to be able to utilize him in this offense. And I think, that's why we were upset he wasn't an early enrollee. So it's good to see that they're still looking to get him out there, but it's probably going to be limited in certain packages. There's still an adaptation there that he's going to have to go through. So, what was your takeaways on the Carter Nelson stuff?
Yeah, again, it was a shame that he didn't enroll early. He wanted to play on his basketball team, and that's all good. You only have one time where you can play on your senior year varsity basketball team. I believe they made it to the state title. So again, that's all fine. But it would have been nice to have him there for the spring practice again to get conditioned, to get in the weight room. He has got some weight over the last couple of months. I think he got about 10, 15 pounds of muscle, but still needs to get up there to that 240, 250 range. Really, that's the number one reason, in my opinion, why he's not playing tight end just yet. Is he's not physical enough. He's not big enough. And he's such a great athlete where you can put him all over the field. You just got to put him on because he's so dynamic. And he has played in the backfield before. He has played wide receiver before because, where he comes from in Ainsworth, he never really even played traditional tight end because it was 8-man football. So this should be a good, smooth transition for him to get him on the field. I wouldn't be surprised if they put him in the backfield. I mean, Matt Rhule said that they're going to kind of make him a guy like Janarian Bonner where he's positionless. He can go wherever. And that's really something that I think is going to be awesome for him. I do think that if he were to get on the field this year, it won't be in those first couple of games. He's still got to get used to college life and, used to the team and getting ready for games. So for that reason, a lot of these true freshmen, you don't really see them until the back half of the year. Wouldn't be surprised if I don't see him until we get into the Ohio State game or something like that. But Carter Nelson, man, I'm just glad that he has a chance to get on the field because for a long time I thought he was going to redshirt. That still may be the case, but at least he's going to be utilized properly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be one of those things that he has to get better as the season goes along, and he will be taking on a more prominent role if he produces in the, they're going to start with him in limited action and see what he does. And if he makes the plays that they want him to make, they'll probably put a little more on his plate. So it remains to be seen. But again, like you talked about, he had said, he told Carter that he will make a special position for him. That's how athletic he is. So it is a guy that makes you better when he's on the field. You just want to make sure that you don't get him out there too early. You make sure that he understands the offense. He understands his role in the offense. So that way the offense doesn't miss a beat, and he gets out there and makes a couple plays and then he proves himself and he'll see the field a lot more. So, and I think his red shirt is probably going to come down to that, just seeing how well he plays in that limited action. And if they think he's, ready, they should be able to gauge that pretty much immediately.
Yep.
But wanted to go a little bit into the coaching changes and talking about what he mentioned in terms of, these coaches now being able to have two coaches at each position. Keith Williams, he said, is going to be on the field coaching on top of his recruiting efforts that he's already done. Ron Brown is coaching the fullbacks and now punt returner, kick returner. So there's a dedicated coach for that. It's able to give more time to guys like David Hofkin and Keelan Wilhite. There's a Jack linebacker coach now, and he wants two at every position because he doesn't want to add a bunch of coaches. He wants to aid in development. And so I think this just goes back to kind of what we talked about when that rule change happened about a month ago and they brought in Mozee, that was the entire reason they brought him in, because they want these guys to be able to individually work with these players. And having two coaches gives you the ability to have one guy take the young guys, one guy can take the more experienced guys, and one guy can get them ready and prepared for the offense. The other guy can coach them and get them ready for the games. And so I think that's going to be big going forward. And he said, he will announce the specifics of who's going to be where going forward. Also said at O-line, they're set. Donovan Raiola, they're good there. And that's what we've been saying this entire offseason is Donovan Raiola is great as a coach, as an O-line coach. Yeah, he's good there. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was honestly the best move that NCAA has made this offseason to allow more coaches for all the programs around the country. Again, Ron Brown getting back, coaching a position. Again, our return game is going to be elite with him at the helm of it. So I feel great about him getting back in. I mean, that just might be the news of the offseason. That a lot of people love Ron Brown, myself included. So huge news there around him. But again, having more eyes on the field, only going to mean good things. Having guys active. So definitely huge news on that coaching aspect. And again, Jamar Mozee being active on the offensive side of the ball, big pros there as well. I think he's going to coach the wideouts along with, having to say in the quarterback room. So again, great stuff there. And, something that I really liked, again, he talked about Tony White throughout Big Ten Media Days. And I don't know if I'm sure you've been watching the Chasing 3 series, but every time Tony White has something to say, I mean, I perk up a little bit. This guy's a bona fide coach. He should be a head coach already. He's the real deal, man. He is incredible. He's a leader. He's, what Matt Rhule says, he's a genius, basically. Yeah. Tony White's special, and we are incredibly lucky to have him as our defensive coordinator, hopefully for the next year plus. So definitely something I took away from media days. But yeah, that coaching moves definitely huge there to get Ron Brown back and a couple other guys like Keith Williams stepping up.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like kick returner, punt returner is one of those things that people don't really think about having a specific position coach for, but I mean, it's as important as your offense. And so, it is your offense in a way,
Exactly.
That's what helps you shorten the field. That's what's going to help Nebraska be able to finish drives and not make turnovers, when we get to the other side of the field. What were we going to say?
And that's like an underrated part about Iowa football is Iowa has a great defense, but they always have a great return game to set up their offense.
It's good.
Nebraska, and special teams. Nebraska has never had, we have a great defense right now. We have never had an elite specialist in the last decade. I mean, the last good one we've had was J.D. Spielman. I mean, you go back to even DeVornay Pearson. So we need to find a guy back there who's dynamic, who's more than just fair catching the football, and Ron Brown's absolutely going to help with that.
100%. Yep. And the main thing that I saw posted around was that he was going to coach fullbacks, but I was surprised more people weren't focusing on the aspect of the return game because that's probably the biggest one there.
Yep.
Talking about good offseason changes that the NCAA made, another one that's probably going to benefit Nebraska that he talked about in the side media, on the side table with the media, was this new scholarship number. And I don't know if, people have seen the scholarship number count, but it's up to 105 now in total scholarships. And, his thoughts on that were, kind of like, he wants to know the details. Said the devil's in the details. Like when Demetrius Bell went down in the spring game, does he count towards a scholarship? He thinks it should be a thing where you announce your scholarships right before the season started. And this also said it hurts with, walk-ons, and the first 2.5 million in scholarships comes out of the revenue share. So, there's a lot of details there that he said he wants to dive into before he speaks on it too much, find the loopholes, he even said, and just see what the specifics are before he dives too far into it. To the risk.
First thing, when I saw that for the NCAA, I thought it was a double-edged sword. Yes, they're moving it up to 105, but they're likely going to put a roster limit somewhere around there, maybe 110, 115. So again, that was a big thing around Big Ten Media Days is, the future of the walk-on program. Where is that going to go? Because we've seen a lot of successful Nebraska players start off as walk-ons. I'm sure, Matt Rhule said that time and time again that he wants to keep that alive, but the NCAA, it's not going to let it stay alive. So, this seems good that, it's moving up to 105, but, they're going to swiftly put in a cap at probably 110, 115 and call it wraps after that. So that was really my takeaway from that. But they also moved up the baseball scholarship thing by like 20, and that was ridiculous.
That's
So that's
crazy.
going to help Husker baseball a lot.
Yes.
Not to get us sidetracked there, but that was my takeaway.
They had a wild jump in baseball. And like you
Yeah.
were talking about, like this is, this seems to be in the NCAA's counter to being able to pay NIL to cover scholarships, that little loophole there. This seems to be kind of a way to take it away, by giving them, more scholarships, but taking away the ability to have, an overall roster size that it was. Coach Rhule said most teams are around 105 to 115 as it is. But he said if it's mandated, he'll find a way because he has no choice. So, but he's talking about it's hurting his ability currently to get in-state walk-ons, which are a big part of this program, or should be. And he's another thing he's talking about is when guys get injured, what it's going to cause is when guys get injured, and let's say they're not going to be there, for the season, it's going to cause. He says not Nebraska won't do this, but it's going to cause other schools to move on from those players and try to replace them, because then you have a scholarship just sitting there with an injured guy, and that's really not in the best interest of the student athlete at all, because at the end of the day, like he said, it's education. So a lot of stuff to still go out there. So take that with a grain of salt, and we'll figure out further details as we kind of sift through the details, and as they tell us what these kind of in the weeds discussions and details are. So I'm sure they'll be able to go into that. Was there anything that, and I know you had some notes, was there anything that you wanted to specifically touch on from media days?
Yeah, there was a couple of players that were name dropped as being breakout players, or guys who are really going to make an impact this year. First off, in the secondary, I believe they asked Isiah Gifford, some younger players who he's seen, just been balling out throughout the summer, through the spring, and he mentioned two guys, Jeremiah Charles, who we've heard a lot about from Matt Rhule, from Evan Cooper during his time here, and then Mario Buford, who was not only name dropped by Isiah Gifford, but also Matt Rhule. Matt Rhule said that they're cross-training Mario to play both safety, both corner,
Yes.
potentially even be in the nickel. So two interesting names there in the secondary, and they definitely need both those guys to step up with, a lack of corner depth.
Yeah, absolutely. And he talked about, that last safety on the field. First off, shout out to Never Mind Me. He said, this might be the last time I get to watch live. Hopefully starting a job next week. I'm gonna sip my drink and enjoy this one. So I appreciate you checking it out, man. Best wishes on the new job. So hope that goes well for you, man. So, and congrats on landing it. If you landed, I don't know. It says hopefully starting a job next week. So hopefully you landed it already and you're starting next week. So shout out to you. But yeah, he talked about how that last safety works as a nickel back, and a nickel package is essentially, it's this similar concept, but you're placing a linebacker with a defensive back to, withstand a more or a lineman with a defensive back to withstand a 5 wide or obvious passing downs and stuff like that. So those guys, when he was talking about their versatility and not matching, they have to be able to have the ability to cover all 5 guys on the field. They also have to have the ability to come down and stop the run. So typically what you're going to get with your outside cornerbacks, you're going to get those longer, rangier guys. And typically what you're going to get with your, nickel backs and whatever, they're either going to be a strong safety, or cornerback or free safety. So they're going to be one of those 3 things typically, but those guys also got to be able to come down and stop the run as well. So that's what he talked about, the versatility there. So, those are guys that are going to be that position is going to be very important on this team, because it's not just a nickel package. It's a look that's out there. It's in the 3-5. The 3-5 is always 5 DBs, so it was interesting to hear his take there. Like Jalen Petrie is a guy he coached. Jalen Petrie is the perfect example of a guy who could come down and be a box safety or nickel corner, whatever you want to call, because he has the ability. He may lack sometimes in his deep coverage, but he has the ability to cover a deep zone. He has the physicality to be able to come down and stop the run, but he also has the ability to cover, maintain cloud flats and stuff like that, and be able to cover his area of responsibility. So, yeah, really good stuff that he was talking about there from those guys. And, Giff talked about, with him, he feels like a Swiss Army knife type of player is what he said, that this second year in the 3-5 is something that he kind of feels like everything's clicking, right? So, a lot of good stuff there from Giff as well. But was there anything else that you want to touch on that before we move them?
Yeah, a couple more. One name that just has been coming up over the last couple of days, out of the blue, honestly, is in that D-line room. A lot of times when we're talking about the D-line, it's Nash, it's Ty, and we're not talking about those guys. It's either Cameron Lenhard or Princewill Mamulum. But the one guy that's really been talked about a lot is not Jamari Butler. It's actually Elijah Jeudy. I've heard his name a lot, whether that was in the Chasing 3 documentary, whether that was today. They're saying he's taken a big step. Again, he's probably the most athletic defensive lineman on the team, that he's night and day better than where he was last year. And I'm guilty of this. I was sleeping on this entire offseason. I haven't thought about him once. I'm thinking about Cameron Lenhard or, again, Jamari Butler and his steps. But yeah, I mean, Elijah Jeudy, expect a lot of good stuff from him this year. Just by the way, everybody's talking about him flying under the radar, but he's a player who, is going to get some significant playing time and could be one of Nebraska's best returners, not just going into this year, but hopefully going into next year as well. He'll probably start. So want to get your take there on the Elijah Jeudy situation, because that was just a name that I kept hearing. I'm like, oh my goodness. I mean, I've been sleeping on him. I should have been talking about him for the longest.
That same here. Like it's, and I think probably we should have been keyed into it just because of how much he's mentioned, but I don't think it was mentioned enough for us to really take note of it. I think it's just the consistent mentions of it. Now that you're kind of starting to see again, like as the season goes along, or as the offseason goes along, again, Matt Rhule doesn't speak of these guys publicly, or not a lot is said about these guys publicly unless they have the ability and they're doing things the right way. So that's alluding to the fact that he is operating in a way that he has impressed the coaching staff to the point where they're mentioning him to this consistency. And that just goes to show that he's going to be on the field, because Matt Rhule just talked about more and more today about his philosophy and doing things the right way. He talked about getting these guys, the guys that he wants to stick with and have on the field, letting them work through their difficulties and their struggles and stuff like that. But he wants the guys that he wants on the field immediately to be the guys that come out there and battle and play the games. They're going to be rotations, of course, but he wants those guys to be able to fight through stuff. If a quarterback goes and throws 5 interceptions, he wants them to be able to battle through that. And I think that's across the board with the players. But at the same time, we saw if it's time, if it's your time to come out, it's your time to come out. So Elijah Jeudy is going to be very interesting to follow now as we go into camp, because I expect that we're probably going to be hearing a lot more of his name called, and more specifically to what he brings to the team as we, move forward closer to the season.
Yeah, and then going back to that D-line room, so Ty Robinson mentioned that Jamari Butler's up to about 260, 265. I mean, that's just a ridiculous transformation. People, need to give that some more attention, because when Jamari Butler got on campus, it had to have been about 3 years ago at this point. He was a skinny linebacker / edge rusher who was about 210, 205 at best. The fact that he's up to, again, 260 and is a true D end in this 335. I mean, that's legit. He's putting the hard work on. It's funny. I saw this post on Twitter today, and somebody said it's going to be a Jamari Butler breakout season. I mean, this dude already broke out. What are we talking about here? This guy already broke out. He was our leader in sacks last year. He's just going to take another step and going to be an NFL guy. So it's funny to me. The fan base just does not appreciate him as much as they should, because he is such a phenomenal player. And, Tommy Hill is in the exact same conversation of a guy who needs to get more respect. Tommy Hill, there's a bunch of good players on this team. Tommy Hill might just be the best player on this entire defense. And people, again, just don't talk about it. I don't understand it, because, again, they're hard workers. They're guys who are doing all the right things and made great strides over the last year. I mean, when we were talking about this last offseason, right? Jamari Butler was not even in the picture. Neither was Tommy Hill.
Tommy Hill, he was.
They both took incredible steps. So, the fan base needs to give them some love, because they're going to be our NFL draft picks this spring. So that was an interesting note there.
Yeah, I've been so focused on praising Tommy Hill this offseason.
Yeah.
People are finally coming around on him on Twitter and stuff. I'm like, bro, I did the video about, I think he could potentially be a first-round draft pick, just in his ability, or at least a first-round grade, just because of the jump that he did made. And kind of like you said, these guys have already broke out, and Jamari Butler, he's shown his work ethic. The fact that he was able to come in and bulk up and really, do the work that he needed to do to get on the field, he deserves to be out there. And his breakout was last year, 6 sacks, led the team in sacks. And with that defensive line, it's not an easy task to lead the team in sacks. So Yeah, Jamari Butler is going to have not a breakout season, but he is going to have a season. That's for sure. And Tommy Hill is going to continue to do what he does. And hopefully we see more improvements from him as well. But yeah, Tommy Hill is a guy who was just buried in the depth chart. You go look at like preseason depth charts from last season. He's just kind of mentioned in the others, and it's one of those things we didn't even know if he was going to be wide receiver room, cornerback room, but the staff saw him as a cornerback. They let him kind of show his, worth, and he proved himself as the season went along. So Tommy Hill is going to be exceptional this season. And yeah, I 100% expect him, in my opinion, him or Stephon Thompson to be our best players outside of maybe a D-line guy, outside of maybe a Nash or a Gifford, but like those are the guys that aren't really, being talked about. I don't even think Stephon Thompson's being talked about enough in a light even. I don't hear enough people talking about Stephon Thompson. I think Stephon Thompson has the potential to be a captain of this defense style of guy, leader of this defense for sure. So
going back to Tommy Hill, one of the reasons I love following recruiting so much is to see how their career progresses from high school. And Tommy Hill, he was interested in Nebraska the first time around. We were in his top 3, us, Arizona State, and I think Michigan State were in there. And again, he ends up committing to Arizona State last second. And I was devastated because he was a great prospect. I wanted to play wide receiver originally. And just to see the development he's had, where he had a great year at Arizona State, his true freshman campaign, went over to Nebraska, struggled mightily, moved to wide receiver, moved back, had off the field issues, and that he's planned at the level he is. I mean, to have him max out on his potential that I saw back in high school, I mean, that's what it's all about following recruiting. So definitely good stuff there around Tommy Hill. And yeah, I agree that there's a lot of guys in this defense that aren't being talked about enough. Stephon Thompson's in there. Guys in this linebacker core. Mekhi Bayer's a dude that I've loved for a long time. I think he's going to be a stud.
Absolutely.
Among some others. Even like the safety core, Marquez Buford, Deshaun Singleton. I mean, those guys are probably our best duo we've had at that safety spot in the last half decade, and people aren't talking about them. It's just all about this D-line, and as it should be, but this is a great defense.
Javen Wright, a linebacker too. Like Javen Wright showed his self big time last year. So, he's another guy that's going to be a big part of this team. And I think it's a good problem to have. We have so many guys that nobody knows to talk to, but this conversation is going to shift a lot of these guys' direction as the season goes along, because right now, Nash and Ty are, of course, the big story. But, a lot of these guys, Gifford, I don't even think Gifford gets enough love, but, he talked about the reason he came back for year 2 is because he wanted to be a part of the jump. And you got to think that's why these other guys wanted to be a part of the jump as well. And even talked about, the family aspect, because there are plenty of veterans. There are plenty of guys that have been through the system, but there's also plenty of new faces. And all of these guys, as we've seen before, Matt Rhule is not afraid to put true freshmen on the field if they earn that spot. So, just being a veteran isn't enough. So yeah, Giff had some interesting comments there, because I would imagine that was pretty much a lot of what everybody else said. Ty's reason for coming back was because he even felt like he was a lesser version of himself last year and feels like he can do more this year as well, another year removed. So a lot of good stuff there. And I anticipate a lot of this defense. He talked about the defense needs to also take a step up this year for Nebraska to be better. This defense is going to take a jump no matter what. And they're going to force more turnovers. You just, like you mentioned Tony White earlier, he said Tony White's one of the best coaches in the country. So he's going to have this defense firing on all cylinders. It's going to be a treat to watch, and they're going to be forcing more turnovers, because that is a point of emphasis. They have to force more turnovers, because he mentioned the turnover margin as well. But yeah, 13 turnovers. That was the big thing about the defense last year, is they could stop, on third down, they could stop these offenses, but they just couldn't force the turnovers. And that's what we needed to kind of be able to take back some momentum. We can never get that momentum back after we started piling up these turnovers, and that killed us. Matt Rhule said we can win 9 games, could have won 9 games last year with a little bit of that, and he didn't think they were a 9-win team. But the way he talks about this team now, it seems like he thinks this team is taking a huge jump forward in that. But yeah, the defense. Any other things on the defense? Of course, this is a very offensive focused media days.
He did mention that he could have brought about 10 or so guys on the defense to Big Ten Media Days. I mean, that just shows you the leadership on that side of the football. One thing that he mentioned I thought was kind of funny is that, talking about recruiting, he talked about fits a lot, and how, there's some prospects that, although they're very talented, he's honestly relieved when they don't commit to Nebraska, because he said, okay, that wouldn't have been a good fit. He really wasn't about the culture that I'm trying to bring here. And he said something. He said, there's very few recruits that I lose sleep over if we weren't to get. But he basically hinted at the fact that if Cade Peterzek didn't commit to Nebraska, he would have lost sleep over it. So that was an interesting little note there about Cade. Obviously, he didn't name drop him, but he was referring to him as the most recent Husker commit. But yeah, he said that basically Cade's one of us, that he is bought into the culture. He's bought into, stuff off the field, and he's a guy of high character. So I thought it was an interesting note there about Cade, and the same thing we've been saying for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, Cade is a monster. You watch his film, and he bullies people. He is a 100% high motor player with the talent to go along with it. So Cade Peterzak is a huge get. So yeah, good call out there as well.
A couple others. I'm surprised we haven't got to this yet, but the Bly Hill injury update, very good news
next
for Nebraska, that they, that for a long time we thought he wasn't going to be back for the first 3 games at best for the Huskers, but it looks like he's going to be ready by week 2, week 3 of fall practice, and hopefully should be suited up when the season starts, if not at the first 2 games, going into Colorado, going into potentially Northern Iowa. So good development there around Bly Hill, and take it away.
Yeah. They said he was going to be in, a couple weeks into camp, he'll be back. But yeah, that's great news. Just because, again, it was just a little bit of a question mark because Sierra Wright has not played in a while. So you just didn't know who was going to be able to come in and fill that spot. And like we talked about in your Colorado video, your point on the defensive backs needing to be able to keep up with those skill position players. Bly Hill is going to make a big difference in that game if he's able to play. Like Bly Hill, again, I'm singing his praises all off. I love Bly Hill, very long, rangy corner, and glad that the news was good, because I remember Vincent Shaver saying when the injury happened, it was like 4 to 6 weeks, but then we're here was going to go into the season. So it's finally nice to get some clarity on that, and expect to see Bly Hill back as soon as he's able to go, because they do not want him off the field. That's for sure.
And perhaps the best thing that Matt Rhule said was, he said point blank when he was on television with BTN, Dave Remsen was interviewing him, that anything less than a bowl game is a failure. He said that, and I quote, that's the expectation, that's the minimum, and that he believes that every single year when he's at Nebraska, he should be in the battle for the conference title. He might not win it every year, right? That's football. That's just the way, it works. But he says anything less than that, that's a failure. So I appreciate him just not dancing around the question, we want to improve this year. We want to see some good things. We're not really going to look at the win column. We've been fed that, BS, from other coaches. But the fact that Matt Rhule just said, hey, anything less than a bowl game, that's a failure. That's on me. That's on the coaching staff. A lot of just put that out there, because that sets the expectation. That sets the tone. We can't dance around questions like that, because as a program, that should be below us.
100%. Yeah. He said he expects us to be good, expect us to win, expects us to be relevant in the conference. He hates when players talks about being favorites in the game. That's just not his style, right? He wants to get out there and prove it on the field. Another interesting thing that I like that he said, he's not going to say, 10 wins is good. He's not going to say, 8-4 is good enough, because then it's almost like they're expecting 4 losses. He's like, he wants to win every game, but even he said, 5-7 is not good enough. And a lot of everybody has been saying, basically everybody's been saying 5 wins isn't going to be good enough. But yeah, like you said, it was good for him to recognize that and speak it out, so people know, like, hey, he's aware of this. You know what I'm saying? Like, he knows, like, it's just not like he's eyes wide shut party, head in the sand. So, but he said he's confident in the team and the depth to withstand injuries. And like we talked about earlier with the wide receiver core, he said the adaptation of the wide receiver core, getting those young guys on the field, while the circumstances weren't great, at least it did give the opportunity to get these guys some experience, and Nebraska is going to be better this year because of that. So.
Yep, that was exactly what I thought there. And I like that, Matt Rhule, he's transparent about a lot of things, a lot of other things not very transparent, but he tells you what you need to know. And a lot of times when you're just looking in between the cracks, you can see, what he means when he's saying these statements. And a lot of it's coach speak, right? And he's a politician, but he dropped a lot of nuggets throughout today, which I thought were pretty beneficial for Nebraska. But that was really the main stuff I wanted to touch on. Again, Del Riola, John Butler, the coaching staff, some of the breakout players, but a lot of stuff that we can take away from this. It was a good media day for Nebraska. We've had some bad ones. I'm going back to Scott Frost in 2022. That was the worst performance of any, coach I've seen at a Big Ten Media Days. But, but at the time, Nebraska fans would tell you that was a great performance because we love Nebraska fans would never give up on Scott Frost. But, anyways.
But then you see something like this and you're kind of like, oh, okay. Like,
yeah, I know a lot of people were giving the UCLA head coach a hard time. Again, he's not a talker, but he's a guy who, honestly, I'd like that hire for UCLA. I think he's going to be successful. He's a player coach for sure. It's a little risky, but Matt Rhule had a lot of good stuff to say about him. And I think UCLA is going to be a little bit of a battle when they come up here to Lincoln.
Deshaun Foster even saved it because, afterwards he's like, how many points did we get for that? He's like, I've seen a lot of guys who are great talkers, but not great coaches. And so I kind of like that. I like that mentality. So, at first I was kind of like secondhand embarrassment when he was up there. But then, the thing is, like, dude, if he's got anxiety, he's not a talker. Like, I'm not going to bash him for that. That happens. Not every coach is going to be able to get up there and be able to public speak to the media perfectly, so, or have a well-polished speech ready to go. So, did we talk about the Evan Cooper, John Butler bully kind of like, because just the Evan Cooper stuff, just to allude to that, talked about Evan Cooper, he wants him to share that story. He wants him to be able to give that stuff, but he did mention that John Butler does make the team better. He mentioned, that they're a better team with John Butler, which was interesting, but, I think it's just one of those things where it's just like, it's not a knock on Evan Cooper. It's just when you have a guy like John Butler's resume, and coming from, Buffalo and him having aspirations, him being a coordinator before and him having aspirations of wanting to climb the ladder. I think he just likes the go-getter attitude and the way that, John Butler is, but he also talked about how he likes that John Butler, and I talked about this when we hired him, just understanding the concepts. And a 3-3-5 isn't a very common defense in the NFL. It's a package that's mixed in, but it's not a base defense. So you get a guy like John Butler, here in the 3-3-5 is kind of being implemented more and more, the 4-2-5 and stuff like that. And he has to come in and learn. He says he doesn't want guys coaching people that, stuff they haven't learned yet. So Butler, he said Butler wanted to come in and learn, and was before he even got out there and started talking to the guys. So a lot of high praise for Butler, and Butler's going to be a great coach.
Yep. I mean, just talking about him and the development aspect of things, that he believes, one of the reasons why he's going to be a good recruiter is that he can relate to these guys and get them to the NFL because he's coached guys like Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, among many others. So he name dropped a couple of those Bills players who've been very successful, and the fact that, he coached the top 5 secondary in the NFL. So yeah, good hire there in John Butler. Just the fact that he said, we got better. And I quote, that was massive. That was telling. And he said that, he didn't want to really say anything about the Evan Cooper situation, and that it was sad that partnership came to an end. I think it's time for us to, officially put down this story when it comes to Evan Cooper. I mean, it's old news, but just know that we got a good coach in John Butler, that he's, a hard worker, that, he's trying to learn the 3-3-5, get up to speed, learn Tony White's defense. He said that Tony White's also playing a part in helping him out and helping the secondary, that Tony White's also a lifelong learner. So I'm really fired up about this defensive side of the football, the coaching staff, the players, the schematics. It's going to be a good year, and it's fun to watch the black shirts for the first time in a long time.
Yeah. And, one of the other things, and I might be reading too much into this, but I do kind of like try to analyze the way he talks about this stuff too. When talking about the running back position, he talked about, because I know, a lot of fans are excited about the Dante Dowdells of the world. However you say it, Dowdle. I've just been saying Dowdle. But when he was talking about the running backs, he kind of said, we feel like, we can win with Gabe, Ramir, and Emmett. And then he said, but they even think they can win with Dowdell and Quentin Ives. And so what that leads me to believe is that that's kind of the level where this is. And that's what we fully expected. Gabe, Ramir, and Emmett, those guys are going to be the guys. And then Dowdell's going to get in sometimes, but he just has more to learn. He got in limited action at Oregon. He just needs more experience, needs more reps. And I know he flashed in the spring game, but it's one of those things where that is the spring game, and it remains to be seen. He'll have an opportunity to battle for this, but it seems like what they're seeing so far, and the way they talked about Emmett and Gabe and Ramir this entire offseason, they're going to be the top 3 guys in the rotation for sure. Going to be, moved out the slot every now and then too. I think Ives is going to get his fair share of the field, but yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think Glenn Thomas is going to bring a unique wrinkle to this offense, specifically in the running back department, because he likes to get running backs involved in the passing game. So again, adding him to this offensive philosophy. Of course, he's not calling plays, but expect a guy like Rahmir Johnson to get the football a lot in space. I know that, Scott Frost tried to make that wide back position that never ended up coming to fruition. But, again, Rahmir Johnson's the best pass pro running back on this team. He's the best blocker. He's the best catching the football. So he's absolutely going to be in the mix. Another guy who people are just saying, oh, he might not play. No, Rahmir will absolutely play. And then, the fact, Gabe Irving, whenever he's been healthy, he's been a top 2 running back on the team. That's going to stay the same this year. And then he said that we know we can win with Emmett. He said, we can win with Gabe. We can win with Rahmir. And he said, I know we can win with Emmett.
Yep.
And just another sign that, Emmett Johnson is going to be that guy because he has that trust with Matt Rhule that, he really broke out last year. He's going to take another huge step this year. But yeah, Donald Dowdle will still be in the mix. There's going to be a lot of rotation in that running back room. There's going to be a lot of injuries. We never in the offseason, we never foresee injuries, but they always happen. And if Dante Dowdle ends up getting on the field because of an injury, he's going to shine. So again, it's a very deep room. Yes. The only problem I've had about the running backs is there's not necessarily a top tier talent in there. Like there was a bunch of what ifs, like, okay, what if Emmett Johnson blooms to the player he can be, or same thing with Dowdle. But as of right now, we just don't have that top, 15 running back in college football. But besides that, it's a very deep room. It's a very good room. And, a lot of times you just don't need that game wrecker, but it would be nice to have one.
Yeah. And the depth even stretches, beyond that, even to Maurice Mazuka, who we on the spring game as well, and heard a lot of good things about from EJ Barthel when he was talking about the running back room. He mentioned Mazuka specifically, brother of Micah Mazuka, for those that don't know. But he came in and did a solid job in that spring game, and he runs hard. And they said that that's a guy they could trust to finish the game if they need to. So they have a lot of confidence in this running back room. And like with Gabe and Rahmir, one of the things that they said earlier this offseason is like, those guys are like near ready to go. Rahmir was ready to go. The reason why they're not having to take part in some of this stuff is because, they know what those guys are mentally. They know how these guys operate. They know they do things the right way. For them, it's about just keeping them on the field. So we've both been saying that Emmett Johnson's the guy most likely, and Gabe and Rahmir are going to be mixed in. Even if he starts, they still may end up with the same amount of touches. It's one of those things that it's going to be a game by game basis. When we're passing more, Rahmir's probably going to be able to see a lot more of the field. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that rotation goes. But that's been a lot of the conversation. I know a lot of people were hyped on Dowdle from the spring game, but at the end of the day, again, it is a spring game and got work to do. But he's going to be a part of this offense as well. So I just thought that was an interesting way that he worded that as well. And then let me go into some of his comments. Hold on one second. Okay, when he was talking about now the big comment about being the best league in the NFL of college football, when that was taken out of context, because he kind of said 4 teams from the Big Ten should get in the playoffs, right? Because he said the Big Ten is like the NFL because of the coast-to-coast play, the weather, et cetera. It's in travel. So it's not like he was saying we're the best, we're the – and like that's what everybody took it out of context and said. But to add to that, that's what he was alluding to. So what were your takeaways on that? But
I don't know why that always happens to Nebraska, but the media takes whatever, like, and they did this all the time with Frost, where Frost would say something, they take it out of context, they put it on a little graphic on Instagram, on ESPN, and boom, everybody's overreacting. Get out the pitchforks. But no, I agree with him that the Big Ten is the most complete league when it comes to football play. That's coach to coach, that has all weathers. You'll play in August and early September, and it'll be 70, 80, 90 degrees. And then by the time you get to November, it's freezing, it's 10. So I fully agree, and I think that's going to give Nebraska the best battle, and that's going to be battled. Any Big Ten team that gets to the playoff is going to be more battle tested and ready to go just because they played this slate. And I'm hoping one thing I hated was when a guy on the college football playoff board said that they're going to factor in weather to who hosts those first round matchups. Yep. I hate that. If a Big Ten team is slated to host, they deserve to host regardless of what the weather's looking like. Have an SEC team come up north and see how they like it, because we've been going down south for way too long. So yeah.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And let's go. I'll touch on a couple of the big topics going into next year. The turnovers and stuff like that. So there's a couple of other things that he alluded to in terms of the turnover margin. Saying that's something he's never dealt with before, but that the close losses don't require a voodoo doll. It's just like hold on to the ball in that instance. Make that catch, and you're going to win some games. But he did say as the season went along, players bought in more towards the end of the season to the fact that we really have to, make it a point to focus on ball security. And he said when he talked, I forget who he said he talked to about, Ron Brown. He said they weren't coaching it hard enough. He's like, we're not coaching that aspect of it hard enough. So that's something he learned as the season went along. So in terms of going into next year, he said he wanted to find the root cause of why it is, being able to hold the ball, drop back to throw. But he said it's corrective action more mistakes. They're not going no more up tempo. If they fumble at the line, it's not like hurry up, let's get to the line and run into the play. He's going back to what he did at Temple as opposed to the NFL route, where players believe in it and they're kind of coaching each other, policing each other, and the defense is really punching at the ball and trying to make it a point to knock the ball out. That way you get better at those details. But that gives us a lot of confidence going into the next year that he understands it a little bit more, and that probably is part of the reason why it was a little struggle to fix the turnover margins. He was just trying to figure out how to coach this stuff out of him. And, it's one of those things where if he focuses on that, and if like he says, they're going to be putting a emphasis on this in every practice, and they're going to be doing drills specifically for this stuff, that those won't prove.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, again, he's a politician, so he'll hype up, guys like Heinrich Haarberg, and then say how bad the turnover issue is without mentioning how, much of a culprit Haarberg was last year when it comes to fumbling the football. I mean, he had 7 picks. Yep. He had multiple fumbles that cost Nebraska in the Purdue game, Northwestern game. Same thing with Jeff Sims. He threw 6 picks and plenty of fumbles. So one thing that NFL teams do that I think Nebraska definitely needs to implement, they have their quarterbacks now go through those running drills to practice ball security, to practice tucking the football. That they need to do that with Dylan, with everybody, because this is a huge issue. It's going to persist again if we don't address it. And again, Dylan Ryle is not necessarily a running quarterback, but what happens when the offensive line breaks down and edge rushers coming off the edge trying to get to Dylan and he drops the football, right? That's going to happen time and time again. That's just football. You've got to contain it. And hopefully they do just that, because we cannot have that fumbling issue again. The interceptions will handle themselves with Dylan Ryle playing, but the fumble issue needs to be addressed. That's going to lose you football games time and time again. And it's actually remarkable that we even had as many close games as we did, despite our turnovers. I mean, we should have lost the Purdue game. Even we should have lost the Northwestern game with all of our.
We should have lost the Illinois game, but they played sloppier than we did.
Exactly. I mean, it was, and then our defense just did so much where, okay, we'd throw a pick and the defense would get it right back. That's how good of a defense we had. So I know, Matt Rhule is saying, we could have won 10 games. We didn't have those issues. Well, we could have had a lot more issues. We could have won 2 games if our defense wasn't half as good as it was. So we got lucky, but at the same time, we didn't. Honestly, looking back on last year, we deserved to win only about 5 games. We were just not a good enough team.
And 100%, like I actually have, so to give you all the stats, because I already have them on right here. 10 turnovers for Jeff Sims, 6 interceptions, 4 fumbles, 11 for Heinrich Haarberg, 7 interceptions, or was it 7 or so? I think it was 11 turnovers total for him, either that or 7 interceptions, 11 fumbles. I hope it's not the latter. I have it written down a little weird way. And then 2 fumbles and 3 interceptions so Heinrich had 11 fumbles last year.
I was trying to look it up the other day when I was preparing for one of my videos, but they just don't put it on the internet. It's ridiculous. Like I was going on ESPN or the other statistics sites, they'll list the INTs, but you have to scratch and claw to find fumble statistics from quarterbacks. But it was up there. I mean, I was watching the Purdue game and the Northwestern game the other day. He had about 5 combined in those 2 games. People forget that. Like Jeff Sims had a fumbling issue. Heinrich Haarberg's was worse. It was worse.
Yeah. And to a little bit of just to take the pressure off of him a little bit for that, his body took a beating, and there's no excuse for 11 fumbles. But I just think, Heinrich Haarberg mentally, like that was a lot for him. And he's a football player. We saw him in the initial stages coming out the first few weeks, and he was just go-getter, just hitting the holes, like running through people. And then you've seen him get a little more tentative because running 20 times a game is going to take a toll on you. So that also had a factor to do with it. But like, he just does need, the team in general needed to get better with ball security, and that includes him. Yeah, I just have it written down in a weird way.
Yeah.
From the other day. So
I mean, going back to Harbaugh, I mean, he was a manageable quarterback. You know, in those first couple games he started, even the Illinois game, he didn't play great, but he was manageable. But he really got beat up in Purdue and Northwestern, so much so that when you got to the Michigan State game and Maryland game, he was, I mean, the worst quarterback in Power 5 football, and it was clear as day to every Nebraska fan that he wasn't the option. You had to probably make a switch there to Purdy, and you know, I'm still mad at, you know, the one thing that Matt Rhule did that, you know, last year was his massive mistake. Is he just botched the whole quarterback room. I mean, Chubba Purdy, although it wasn't a great quarterback room and there were some injuries in there, we saw that Chubba Purdy was the best quarterback and honestly probably best fit for this offense. We didn't see him play until, you know, the last week of the year, or the second last week of the year against Wisconsin, and he gave us opportunities to win both of those games. So I love Matt Rhule. He's a great developer. It was just kind of an issue. It's not going to happen again because he was still learning the team. He was still learning who's on it, who's good. But man, was that just a debacle, because if Chubba Purdy started earlier in the year, we would have made a bowl game.
Yes. And a lot of people neglect to mention that the fact that, you know, we fully expected to have Sims and Casey Thompson, you know, but like you said, Chubba was the guy.
Debacle that we could get into where, you know, Matt Rhule wouldn't give Casey Thompson the job. He told Casey Thompson point blank, hey, if you're going to stay here, you're going to have to earn it. And Casey's like, no, I'm a senior. I'm not going to sit here and do that. I'm going to transfer out. So that was another whole debacle where it's like, oh, we had a pretty good quarterback here, Matt. You might have wanted to just give it to him here for a year and then we could figure it out.
Yeah. And one of the things that like I didn't like was how the fans kind of talked about Chubba. When Chubba was brought in, wasn't it? I think it was a drive. We were driving down the field. Was it the Michigan game? I cannot remember where he came in, but it was a tough situation that he had to come into in his games where he first kind of took the field. And that's not easy. And a lot of players,
Michigan State or he was definitely in the Maryland game.
Yeah, because this was I think the year before. Yeah, I cannot quite remember, but I know we were driving. We were on that side of the field, and you know, he came out and, you know, didn't perform well. And then, so it's one of those things, like, he has to gain that confidence and stuff like that. I just don't think he had the opportunity to really catch a rhythm, gain that confidence, because, you know, he was a 4-star quarterback, committed to Florida State before. He's got talent, you know, of course, his brother plays in the NFL, but, you know, and also, like, I know a guy who knows his family, and they're just really good people overall. But yeah, it's just unfortunate the way Chubba Purdy, you know, how it ended up for him. But, you know,
remind me, he transferred to Nevada, right? I think he was originally committed to San Jose and then ended up flipping to Nevada. But yeah, he's going to start there. I'll have a little eye on their program, because again, he had a very high potential, really high potential. Again, his brother, obviously Brock. People said that Chubba was a farther along quarterback, you know, coming out of high school. So that should really tell you how, you know, much of a talent he is. And it was sad that he moved on, because I really thought he could have been a nice leader in this room this year. But again, I don't think, you know, if I could have done this all over again, I would have picked the exact same thing to end up with Dylan Raiola in year 2. So
yeah, exactly. Any updates on, so he did mention David Huffkin today when he was just talking about some of those guys that, you know, he mentioned him with Keona Wilhite and some of those guys that are going to need extra attention, and why these, you know, this new rule of quality control and analysts being able to coach these guys is helpful. It's going to be helpful with guys like, you know, Huffkin, who need that extra attention. So Huffkin is very much on the team, and, you know, he was spoke about today. Maverick Nunan. So Maverick Nunan, any updates? Have you heard any updates on Maverick Nunan?
Not too much. That he was playing really well throughout spring ball. Obviously, that injury last fall. He was honestly, before he got injured, he was probably not going to redshirt. That's how good he was off the jump. He's, again, guy who's coming out of Lincoln. His dad, the great Danny Nunan. So hopefully he gets on the field. It's just such a tough D-line room. It's so tough to get playing time there with how deep it is. Like, we could sit here and talk about David Hoffkin and sit here and talk about Maverick Nunan, or even Sua Lafodu, who got a lot of hype. But I just can't see them break out. And the only way, and Maverick Nunan, I think he plays a little bit of jack as well. If he could really get into that jack position, he could get some playing time. But other than that, it's going to really be a year 3 thing for him. But he has some upside, man. He is really good. And again, watching him in high school back when he was in Lincoln, he was the same guy. He was awesome.
the fact that they're not speaking on it too much, probably goes to show me that there are more important, things. And like you said, it's a deep room there. So, or maybe, I don't know, or if they don't like where he's at with his progress enough to speak on it. So, it'll be one of those things to monitor, but it's something they're keeping very close to the vest because I hadn't heard anything on that. So, yeah.
And Maverick Nunan's a guy where, he grew up a Nebraska fan. One thing that I'm always worried about when you have these deep rooms is somebody going to transfer out. You don't have to worry about that for Maverick. He will be in the mix to get some legit playing time next year. He's a very good player, but it's just such a deep room,
100%. So, let's see. Hope they really try to punch out the ball more this season. Yeah, and I think that's kind of what he was talking about when he's talking about like wanting his defense to be able to punch the ball out of the offense's hands, so they learn, not to hold the ball out here. It's one of those things that they're emphasizing and forcing turnovers this year with the defense, because that's the way when Matt Rhule was talking about how this defense is going to take a step up next year, he was talking about turnovers. That is the one thing that this team didn't do last year, is force turnovers. They did a lot of things, most things well, but that's the one thing they need to improve upon. But that's also a positive thing, because that means there is room for improvement on this defense. So not only are we going to cut back on turnovers, we're going to gain turnovers. This is why I don't think people fully understand outside of those walls and outside of Nebraska just how much of a turnaround this could actually be. And I think more and more we're seeing signs of that with how the players were talking about coming back. And again, Gifford talked about, the family again, with plenty of veterans and stuff like that coming back. But yeah, so hopefully we'll see some about kind of like, what their game plan is this season. We'll probably get more details about kind of what they're focusing on in this camp as we get through it. So we'll have more answers on this type of stuff whenever that comes around. So all right, injury report. That coach is a little nervous, excited about the season. Some Nebraska prognosticators. Gee, I can't talk today. Prognosticators seem to be unaware that teams like USC, UCLA got big, fast athletes on their roster. So, the thing though, they do got, big, fast athletes on their roster. I still think there's going to be a bit of an adjustment there for a lot of those teams, because they're not quite Big Ten physicality. The level of physicality isn't there. That's also size is one thing, and speed is one thing. The Pac-12 does speed well, but like your Oregon's going to be built to play anybody. They got guys who are big. They're a physical team, and they can spread you out. But physicality is something that people don't mention enough, and that's not a brand of football that was in the Pac-12, and that is a brand of football that is in the Big Ten. That's going to be the biggest adjustment, in my opinion, that these teams are going to have to do, is adjust to the physicality of the, knockdown, drag them out Big Ten style of football.
I think USC should make a pretty nice transition. Obviously they don't play that smash mouth football, that you necessarily see in the Big Ten, but a lot of people are sleeping on UCLA. I keep seeing these power rankings where they put UCLA at 16, 17, 15. UCLA went 8-4 last year. I mean, they were a pretty darn good team. They had one of the best defenses in college football. Now, they do lose a couple of players here and there, but they have a very talented team. They remind me of some Nebraska teams in the past where talent's not the issue. That's something you can check off the box. They have plenty of talent, lots more than a lot of these other schools. If they can just figure out the coaching part of things, if Deshaun Foster can hit the ground running, obviously they lose Chip Kelly, who wasn't the best coach, but he won 8 games there last year. So that I don't understand the whole thing around UCLA, the whole stigma there where people honestly are underrating them. They're going to be a tough competitor for anybody. I really think Nebraska has their hands tied when they come to Lincoln. That's going to be a battle, man.
Yeah, I think what a lot of it has to do with, and on my Big Ten show, I knocked them down a little bit, UCLA down a little bit after the Deshaun Foster hire, just because it wasn't a very sexy hire, if you will. In going from a position coach to a head coach, it was one of those things where it's like they had better options. You felt like they settled a little bit with Deshaun Foster in terms of just the level of coach that you think UCLA would be able to get. So I do think that knocks them down a couple of pegs, but I do also think that they're being dismissed a little bit more. And USC is going to be very tough this year. I've spoken with a lot of USC guys. Mark Culkin from Lockdown USC, I talk with him a lot. He's the one who gave me kind of some of the insight to Sierra Wright. But that defense is, that defense doesn't have to be, Miller Moss is going to surprise some people in the USC. That defense doesn't have to be crazy. Like, they're very similar to Nebraska in offense, where they don't have to be world beaters defensively, because Lincoln Riley's going to have that offense humming, and Miller Moss is a really good quarterback. So, those California teams are going to be tough. What were you going to say?
One thing about UCLA, I mean, Deshaun Foster and his tenure there is going to be defined on how good his surrounding staff is, because he's a player's coach, right? He's not necessarily the X's no coach. He's not necessarily that tireless recruiter. He's going to need a good coaching staff to be their OC, be their DC, who are basically the enforcers, who can, demand that accountability. And if he doesn't have that, it's going to collapse pretty quick. So again, I'm not sure who's their OC, DC at UCLA. I have to dive into that, but that's really going to be the key in his tenure. But again, talent's not the issue for UCLA. If he can establish a recruiting connection in LA, he's going to be just fine for the foreseeable future. But again, I just think too many people are underrating them. And same thing with USC. USC only won 7 games last year, but if we were to make a power rankings right now of, the most talented teams in the Big Ten, they'd probably be top 5 at worst, around 6 or 7. So that, again, another tough battle for Nebraska. Say what you want about their program, but Lincoln Riley, that's arguably the best offensive mind in all of college football. He's a quarterback whisperer, and expect Miller Moss to, have a good day against Nebraska's secondary.
There's one thing that we know Lincoln Riley does well, and it's coach quarterbacks, it's coach offenses. So, and I also don't think Lincoln Riley gets enough respect, but they made that defensive coordinator change, so they should, even if they're in the top 50s, that's going to be a tough team for anybody to beat. So, very, very interesting stuff, on kind of what when he was asked about, kind of that same thing, he alluded to, them kind of having to get accustomed to, because they play in cold weather too as well. So, but I just think that's the biggest thing, is just the physicality. Once those teams have that physicality, then they're going to be right there in contention. And some of these teams might already have that physicality, but it's just something we weren't able to see on display in the Pac-12. But so these coaches have coached in other conferences, and they understand that these players need to play a physical brand of football. So that is something that they probably still work on, but just in the Pac-12, they didn't have to go through it week in and week out. And I think that grind might be a little bit take a toll.
Yeah, that's a good point, though. Like, a lot of the narrative, especially in Big Ten media days, how is UCLA or USC going to transition to playing, in the cold weather? Like the Pac-12, they have some, cold places there. Of course, Washington, Wazoo, Oregon State, like they get very cold in the winter, just as cold as it gets here in the Midwest. So I think that narrative is a little bit thrown out there too much. Like they're going to be just fine when it comes to weather. It's just going to be about adjusting to the play. And, like you said with Oregon, if you're talented enough, you can run any offense or defense you want and be successful. But it's these teams like UCLA or USC who have talent. They just don't have, that upper echelon talent. They might need to switch things up. We'll see if they do that.
Yeah. Another interesting thing too, is like, we talk about weather when it comes to Pac-12 teams coming over to the Big Ten, but like, why don't we put that same, we see so many times where a quarterback's drafted out of the NFL that's played in, you look at Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, like those guys played in Georgia, and those guys played, didn't they both come out of the state of Georgia? I'm pretty sure. Oh, Justin Fields. I'm sorry. I was thinking Justin Fields came out of Georgia. Sorry. But those because I think Deshaun was from South Carolina. But those type of guys, they come to, the NFL, and they're able to play in cold weather. They're able to come succeed in cold weather. So I think it's a little overstated in terms of the weather regard, because I think a lot of those guys can play in cold weather. A lot of these guys are recruited from cold weather states. So yeah, I do think that's a little bit overplayed, and we don't put enough emphasis on that. Like if you recruit a high school guy from, a warm climate to come play at Nebraska, we're not worried about how he's going to adapt to the weather, because we know it's probably going to happen. They'll find a way. So that's another aspect of that too. So just going through here. He said, "Hello, I'm Cornhead, Tiger Shark diver. Sorry, what's up, Cornhead? I appreciate you stopping in here. I just didn't know what that was about. Matt using excuses for his losses too much, kind of weak. Which one? I don't think he was using excuses.
The turnovers.
His lot. That's what it was. I mean, that was really what it was. TSD Cornhead longer 2007.
At least Matt Rhule doesn't sit here like Scott Frost and just perpetuate the close losses every single offseason and say, "Oh, if we just do this," I mean, that was Scott Frost's calling card every offseason was the whole close losses thing. I mean, Matt Rhule's still doing similar, but not even close to the amount that Scott Frost. Oh, we did a lot of good things. Just need to switch up, this, that, and this. Oh, it would drive me crazy.
And to this, I was able to find them if you just type in the specific player in their advanced run statistics. I was able to find it doing that. So that's another way you can search it up as well. Thought he came in when the ball's on Nebraska 1 yard line. Tiger Sharp Diver, what's up? Justin Ken Funway, Mike. Sorry, I'm just trying to get through y'all's stuff here to see if y'all have any questions. You guys are good. You're now deep divers to refresh compared to old Forest talk about football and beer. Hey, I appreciate that, Andrew. Real appreciate that, man. Thank you so much. I'm glad you like the show. I'm glad everybody that's always in here. I appreciate everybody who always stopping by. So I disagree with USC about not being physical enough. No, that's not. I don't think they're not physical enough. I just don't think that they've had a chance to show their phicality. And it's just because, like I said, I don't think it's something we've seen with them.
USC's defensive line's legit. They got some talent there. They got NFL draft picks on the D line every year. I think Bear Alexander's come back for another. He's going to be one of the better one techniques in the country. So I mean, their D line's pretty good. I know that for a fact.
I mean, they got some size to their defensive line too, so that's not going to be a problem there. Do UCLA is a bunch of bums, Bel Air bums. I like that. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on all
that. That might be. We might go back to that if we end up losing to them in Lincoln. We might go back to that.
I'm not going to speak this comment out loud. We go there. All right. Well, is there anything else that you? Oh yeah, one last thing too that I kind of liked with Matt Rhule when he was talking, and somebody a reporter pointed out to this is one of the first things he's talked about was Nebraska having the highest cumulative GPA ever. That is one of those things that is part of what makes this family vibe and these parents want their kids to come play for Nebraska and want them to come play for Matt Rhule, because he's just talking about the importance of that and building young men as opposed to just building football players and just worried about what they do on the field.
Actions speak louder than words, and he's always been saying that he cares about players off the field more than what they do on the field. And again, that statistic that shows you that he's already doing a great job. And props for him mentioning that. I know, and the reporters said that no other coaches mentioned that, but definitely really impressive thing for the team. Just the fact that they're exceeding in the classroom. Again, it's a student athlete for a reason, not just an athlete.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we went a little over, so I appreciate you again, Wilson, for taking the time to stop by. If y'all don't mind leaving a like on the live stream, whenever we conclude, drop a like. It really helps me out. And, we'll have more coming for you. I'll have some videos coming out, of some stuff covering Big Ten Media Days that I didn't get to today. I tried to get to most of it today, but we'll go a little bit in depth there. And, camp's coming up very, very soon. So we will have some football to talk about. I know it's been a while. It's been a grind this offseason. Somebody said earlier that this offseason has felt longer than it usually has. It 100% has felt like the longest offseason I've had in a while.
Just fall camp, really, that'll start to sink in. And there 2 weeks away, 1 week away, and then UTEP right there. So
yeah. Usually I have a job to distract me, but this is my job now.
Yeah.
So I don't have that anymore. So now I'm focusing every day on this stuff. So it's almost making it drag by a little bit more. So, but Wilson, do you want to tell, everybody what you got coming up? I know you have a big video coming up July 27th.
Yep.
You want to talk about a little bit of what you got coming up?
So we got some big recruiting videos over the next 2 days. I think I got 2 or 3 lined up that I will post both tomorrow and Friday. And then Saturday, huge video. I'm posting that at noon Central. I don't want to spoil it just yet on what it is, but I've been working on it for basically the entire month of July. I got a lot of statistics behind it, graphics behind it. I think it ended when I finished editing it, it was about an hour long. So make sure to go to my channel, set your notifications for noon Central on Saturday, because again, I put a lot of work in that video and I want you guys all check it out. You're not going to want to miss it, but won't spoil it completely. But a lot of recruiting to talk about until we get there.
Yep. Noon Central. And then we also had a video on Wilson's channel recently answering y'all's questions.
Yep. Watch that.
One will be coming on my channel. I'm just going to gather more questions from y'all. What's up, Moose? Moose stopping in here. Moose, you're late. No, I'm just playing. I'm moving. You know how that goes. Appreciate it, Dion. I think Coach Rhule is the best thing since Bo, just giving him a hard time about the weather thing. Thanks, Justin Wilson. Oh, the weather. That's what it was. Okay. We thought you were talking about the turnovers. So appreciate you, Mike. And then did you guys touch on Ron Brown? Yes. Yeah, we did touch on that because we were talking about how kind of understated it is that he is going to be also working with the returners because of how big news that is, because Nebraska needs a return game, especially to take some of the stress off of this offense. That's even more important with the true freshman quarterback this year. So anything else? Did you want to touch on that at all before we head out? So
yeah, no, I said that might be just the news of the offseason. We got a bunch of good news, but Ron Brown, he's just a fan favorite, a guy who's been working for the Huskers for as long as I can remember, 40 plus years. And the fact that he's getting back to returning or being with the returners and with the fullbacks, it's just going to pay dividends. And just the whole coaching change with the NCAA, who are going to have more eyes on the field, and it's just going to assist development. And I trust Matt Rhule when it comes to that part of it. I mean, he's going to do the right thing, get everybody involved. And definitely some good news there to cap things off. But I mean, exciting times, dude. I mean, fall camp in about a week. Finally got a lot of recruiting stuff. Recruiting never dies down. Big Ten Media Days, about to end off, and we got just a lot of stuff to talk about. I mean, it's kind of sad the summer's over, but I'm excited for football, excited for everything that started to get going again.
Yep. So be sure you go over there to Wilson. We're going to cover everything that we possibly can this season for y'all. So if you want nonstop coverage, be sure you get over there, follow Wilson, and make sure you subscribe here if you haven't yet.
Absolutely.
But that'll do it for us here today. I appreciate everybody stopping by. I have some, like I said, I have some recordings coming up for y'all about, Big Ten Media Days, maybe camp previews and stuff like that. And, but other than that, I will see y'all next Tuesday back to the regular time. So, all right, everybody take care, and we'll see you next time. Peace.